Chapter 6 The Creature's Story. It is hard for me to remember the first days of my life. I could see, feel, hear, and smell, but I did not understand these sensations. Light bothered me, and I looked for shade. I found it in the forest near Ingolstadt. I rested there by a brook. I ate some berries, drank from the brook, and slept by the water. It was dark when I awoke. I felt cold and frightened. Before I had left our apartment, I covered myself with some clothes, but these were not enough to protect me from the dews of the night. I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew nothing. Feeling pain on all sides, I sat down and wept. Soon, a gentle light stole over the heavens. I learned later that this was the moon. I gazed at it with wonder. I again went out to look for berries. I was still cold when under one of the trees I found a huge cloak. I covered myself with it and sat down on the ground. No ideas came to my mind. All was confused. Several days passed and I began to sort out the sensations I was feeling. My vision became clearer. I began to realize that certain pleasant sounds came from the throats of the little winged animals I saw. Sometimes I tried to sing like birds. The sounds that came from me frightened me into silence again. One day, I found a fire that had been left by some wandering beggars. I was overcome with delight at its warmth. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but I quickly drew it out in pain. I found with pleasure that fire gave light as well as heat. I also found that the taste of certain foods was improved when placed on the live embers. Food, however, became scarce, and I was forced to leave the area and look elsewhere for food. I started to walk through the wood toward the setting sun. I walked for 3 days and at length came to open country. I saw a small hut, which was a new sight to me. Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat there near a fire, preparing his breakfast. Seeing me, he shrieked loudly, left the hut, and ran across the fields. I greedily ate the rest of his breakfast. Then I lay down and fell asleep. It was noon when I awoke. I left the hut and continued across the fields. At sunset, I arrived at a village and I entered one of the cottages looking for food. The children inside shrieked. The whole village was stirred up and the people chased me away, throwing rocks and other things at me. I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel. It was joined to a cottage of neat and pleasant appearance. However, after my recent experience, I dared not enter. The hovel was made of wood. It was so low that I could barely sit up in it. However, it was dry inside, and it protected me from the snow and rain. I was happy to have found a shelter against the weather and against the cruelty of people. This little shelter was a paradise compared to the forest, with its rain-dropping branches and the cold ground. As I was counting my blessings, I heard a step. Looking through a small crack, I saw a young girl with a pail on her head passing before my hovel. 15 minutes later, she returned carrying the pail, which was now partly filled with milk. A young man met her. Both of them looked very sad. He took the pail and carried it to the cottage. She followed, and they went inside. The young man then left carrying some tools. She kept busy, sometimes in the house and sometimes in the yard. I could see into the cottage through a small crack in the wall of my hovel. There was an old man inside, sitting in a corner near a small fire. Presently, the girl took an instrument from a drawer and gave it to the old man. He began to play, producing sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. They looked at each other with such kindness and affection that I felt strange sensations, a mixture of pain and pleasure. I stopped watching them, unable to bear these emotions. Soon after this, the young man returned carrying a load of wood. The girl helped him with his burden, taking some of the wood into the cottage. She placed it on the fire. I watched as they prepared and ate their dinner. It was a simple one of bread, cheese, and soup. Then the old man walked outside for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. They all seemed to love each other very much, and yet the young man seemed extremely unhappy. When night came, I was surprised to see that the cottagers had a way of keeping it light inside. They used candles, which I had never seen before. I was delighted to find that the setting of the sun did not put an end to the pleasure I had in watching them. The old man again played some music. Then the young man began to utter sounds I did not understand at all. I learned later that he was reading aloud, but at that time I knew nothing about words or letters. A short time later, the family put out the lights and went to sleep. I lay on the floor of my hovel, but I could not sleep. I thought about the people in the cottage. I longed to join them, but I dared not. I remembered how the villagers had treated me. I thought it best to remain hidden. The cottagers arose the next morning before the sun. They followed the same routine as they had the day before. I soon realized that the old man was blind. Nothing could exceed the love and respect that the younger cottagers showed toward him. They treated him gently and lovingly, and he smiled sweetly at them. They were not entirely happy. I began to think that if such lovely creatures were miserable, it wasn't so strange that I should be wretched. It took me a long time to figure out that one of the reasons for their unhappiness was their poverty. Their only food came from their own garden and the milk of their one cow. They were often hungry, especially the younger ones. Several times they gave food to the old man when they had none for themselves. This kindness moved me. I had been stealing some of their food during the night for myself. When I saw that they had so little, I stopped. Instead, I gathered berries, nuts, and roots from a nearby wood. I found a way I could help them. I saw that the youth spent a lot of time collecting wood for the family fire. During the night, I often took his tools and brought home enough wood for several days. The first time I did this, I saw how surprised they were. I saw with pleasure that he did not go to the forest that day. Instead, he spent time repairing the cottage and working in the garden. I soon realized that they communicated with each other by making sounds. I strongly desired to learn how to do this. After several months, I learned and applied the words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I also learned the names of the cottagers themselves. The old man had only one name, Father. The girl was called either Sister or Agatha. The boy was called Felix, Brother, or Son. I learned several other words, but I did not yet understand them. They were good, dearest, and unhappy. I spent the winter in this way. I saw few human beings besides them. If any others happened to enter the cottage, their rude manners only made me realize how superior my friends were. I began to notice that Felix was the saddest of the group. He appeared to have suffered more deeply than others. I could tell you many things that showed what kind of people they were. In the midst of poverty and want, Felix gave his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. Early in the morning, he cleared away the snow that blocked her path to the milk house. Then he brought in the wood that, to his surprise, he found replaced each day by an invisible hand. During the day, I believe, he worked sometimes for a neighboring farmer. He would often leave, not returning until dinner. Yet he brought no wood back with him. He spent a lot of time reading to the old man and Agatha. This reading had me puzzled at first. Then I realized that when he read, he used many of the same sounds as when he talked. I figured out that he found on the paper signs for speech that he understood. I wanted to learn how to do this. It wasn't possible, however, because I didn't even understand the spoken language. I knew it was important to learn to speak. Only then would I be able to introduce myself to them. If I could speak, maybe I could get them to overlook the deformity of my figure. One day I was terrified when I saw my reflection. At first, I didn't believe it was I who was reflected in the pool of water. Then I became convinced that I was really the monster that I am. I was filled with a bitterness, feelings of sadness. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of my appearance. As the sun grew warmer and the days longer, the snow vanished. I saw the bare trees and the black earth. Felix was very busy in the garden. Several new kinds of plants sprang up, which the family ate. These signs of comfort increased as the season advanced. My days followed a pattern. In the morning, I watched the actions of the cottagers. When they were busy in the afternoon, I slept. The rest of the day, I watched my friends. When they went to sleep, I went into the woods and collected my own food and wood for the cottage. Once or twice, I heard them say, "Good spirit," or "Wonderful," when they found the wood. However, I did not understand those words then. I wanted nothing more than to find out why these creatures were so sad. I thought that I might be able to restore happiness to them. I looked upon them as superior beings. I imagined 1,000 ways of presenting myself to them and how they would react to me. I imagined that they would be disgusted at first, but then, by my gentle nature, I would win their favor and later their love. These thoughts led me to try even harder to learn the art of language. I was learning to pronounce with some ease those words I understood. Spring was changing the earth. The birds sang in more cheerful notes, and the leaves began to bud on the trees. Happy, happy earth! My spirits were raised by the enchanting look of nature. The past was blotted from my memory. The present was tranquil, and the future full of hope.